Chosen ones. There are moments in history when paper is heavier than stone, when a single folded sheet carries more weight than the roar of armies. On the desk before the president lay such a memo, cream-colored, edges frayed as though it had traveled through hands unworthy of holding it. A black wax seal pressed deep into the parchment bore a sigil no modern agency could trace, yet its lines whispered of centuries past. They say the courier who delivered it did not wait for acknowledgment. He simply set it down, met the president's eyes for a fraction of a second, and left the Oval Office door swinging in silence. The president's fingers hesitated before breaking the seal, not from fear of the words within, but from the knowing, the deep, unshakable sense that what he was about to read would not be unseen. Blavatsky'S name was not spoken in the room, yet the air shifted as though she herself had stepped through time to watch. Those versed in her work knew she wrote of an arrival, a soul whose aura would not just illuminate, but ignite a chain of events too intricate for mortals to script. Every prophecy had its doubters, every mystic her critics, but here it was, your name, inscribed in a hand that had not existed in a century, inked in letters that shimmered when tilted toward the light. A signature no analyst could decipher sealed the final line. The one has arrived. The threads converge. Protect the vessel. Outside, the rain began without warning, tapping the glass like coded knocks. The president leaned back, memo still in hand, his gaze shifting to the window, as though expecting the sky to answer. Advisors were called in hushed tones, their footsteps soft but urgent. None were told the full content, only that a decision of magnitude was now in motion. In the farthest corner of the room, unnoticed by all, a faint glow pulsed and faded, as if the paper itself was breathing. Somewhere beyond the walls of power, events began aligning. Strangers moved without knowing why, and an invisible thread tightened. The man they summoned was not part of the president's official circle, his name absent from any roster or visitor log. He arrived without escort, yet moved through security as if the building itself recognized him. His coat was worn at the sleeves, the kind of wear that comes not from neglect, but from long years spent traveling between places where knowledge is guarded like treasure. When he entered the room, the president did not speak. Instead, he slid the open memo across the desk, watching for the subtle shifts in the man's expression. The eyes that scanned the page were not merely reading, they were unraveling. Each stroke of the pen, each subtle curve of the letters, seemed to ignite recognition in him, as if every word were an old friend returning after a long absence. He paused halfway down the page, fingers hovering above a single line. His lips moved without sound, forming syllables that belonged to a language few living could pronounce. He tilted the paper toward the light, the ink catching in a way that revealed faint lines beneath the visible ones, layers hidden in plain sight. Lines that could only be read when the angle and light converged perfectly. The president leaned forward, unable to keep from asking what he saw. The man answered, only with a question. How long have you known that this was never meant for human eyes? The silence that followed was not from uncertainty, but from the weight of confirmation. Outside the window, clouds shifted into strange formations like geometric patterns, drawn and erased in the span of seconds. Somewhere beyond those walls, an air current carried whispers across the city, as though the world itself had caught the scent of something long hidden. The man set the memo down, not closing it nor returning it. Instead, he rested his hand upon it, eyes still locked on the shifting script. "I have read prophecies. I have studied archives. But this," he said without looking up, "is not prophecy alone. It is a map, but not to a place. It points to a moment, one that bends all others around it." And then the lights flickered in the Oval Office once, twice before steadying, leaving both men staring at each other, knowing they had just crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. The memo was not the only artifact on the desk. A second sheet had been folded inside the first, so thin and delicate it might have been overlooked by anyone less deliberate. Its edges were uneven, as if torn from an ancient ledger. The man unfolded it carefully, revealing margins filled with dense script. Unlike the central text, these side markings were written in an almost ornamental hand, curling and looping, as if each letter were a prayer in motion. As his eyes traveled the lines, he realized this was no ordinary commentary. It was a psalm, but not one found in any public scripture. The cadence and imagery echoed those sung in the oldest temples, words of refuge and light, but layered with symbols that spoke to mysteries known only to the initiated. Some lines shimmered faintly, as though the ink itself remembered the voice of the one who had written them. One passage stood out marked by a single star in the corner. "Blessed is the one who walks unseen, yet carries the fire before them." A presence stirred in the air around him, and for a fleeting moment he recalled the teachings of Yeshua about the kingdom that comes not with observation, but is within. The connection was not literal, but it pressed against his mind with the weight of truth, like two rivers meeting beneath the surface. He traced the star with his fingertip and felt an almost imperceptible vibration in the parchment. Not a sound, but a resonance. A shift in the room's stillness followed, as if invisible eyes had turned to watch. The president leaned closer, unable to read the ancient tongue, but sensing the gravity in the man's posture. "What does it say?" he asked. The man hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from the difficulty of placing eternity into mortal language. "It speaks of a light that must be hidden until the appointed hour," he replied, "and of the one whose presence fulfills the pattern written before time began." Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, the kind that carries more than weather with it. The man folded the sheet again, not fully hiding the star in the corner. Instead, he left it visible upon the desk, a reminder that some truths refuse to vanish, no matter how deeply they are buried. They called for her in the late hours, when most of the building had emptied. Her steps through the corridor were unhurried, yet each one carried the certainty of someone accustomed to summoning answers from the shadows. She was known only as the archivist, though her true name was sealed in files no one admitted existed. When she entered the room, her gaze did not rest on the president or the man beside him, but on the parchment itself, as if she had been expecting its arrival for years. Without asking permission, she reached for the memo, her thin fingers tracing the edges with an almost reverent touch. She glanced once toward the door, then rose to shut it, turning the lock twice, though one would have sufficed. Her eyes scanned the text quickly, yet nothing about her expression suggested haste. She seemed to be measuring each word against some unseen reference, the way one matches constellations to a chart long memorized. She stopped midway, her breathing slowing, as if she had just encountered a landmark in a vast and dangerous map. The man watched her closely, noting the way her pupils shifted when the ink caught the lamplight, as though the letters themselves moved under her gaze. She set the memo down, then moved to the window, drawing the curtains closed with a single, swift motion. Darkness wrapped the room, leaving only the desk lamp casting a small island of light over the parchment. She spoke without turning. This should not be here. Not in this room. Not in this time. The president asked where it belonged. Her answer came after a long pause. In the vault, beneath the hall of mirrors in the city, they no longer mark on maps. The weight of her words settled heavily in the air, the kind that shifts the course of conversations before they are even spoken again. She walked back to the desk, her hand hovering above the paper without touching it. "The script is still alive," she said softly. "It listens to the one who reads it, and it will not rest until the appointed reader finishes what has been started." Somewhere far beyond the locked door, a faint metallic sound echoed through the corridor, as if something had just been unlatched. It was the archivist who first noticed it, a faint discoloration spreading through the lower edge of the parchment, as though the ink itself had begun to seep beyond its boundaries. She tilted the page under the lamplight, and what appeared to be nothing more than aged stains resolved into words pressed from the other side. Yet the other side was blank. The man leaned closer, recognizing a rhythm in the faint marks, a structure not unlike ancient hymns. He began to sound out the syllables under his breath, and the air around the desk shifted almost imperceptibly. The archivist stepped back, her eyes narrowing. "This is not a translation," she said. "This is the voice beneath the text, the part that was never meant to be written, but revealed only when the veil thins." One fragment stood clear even among the ghostly lines. "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." The president's brow furrowed at the familiarity, though he could not place it. The man glanced at him, his voice low. That line was spoken by Yeshua, and it was recorded in the oldest scrolls. It is a warning, but also a design, a reminder that what is dismissed holds the true foundation. The letters grew sharper as they read them, as though responding to recognition. Each curve of the script glimmered faintly like molten gold, cooling into form. The archivist whispered something in a tongue the president did not know, and for a moment the room felt heavier, as if the weight of unseen centuries had pressed down on its walls. Outside the storm intensified, sheets of rain hammering against the windows. The lights flickered once more, though the generator hummed steadily. The man reached out to touch the margin where the verse had appeared, but his hand stopped inches from the page. The heat rising from it was not from the lamp, but from something within the parchment itself. The archivist folded the memo carefully, but the faint words did not vanish. Instead, they hovered just beneath the surface, visible only when the paper caught the right light. She looked between the two men and said softly, "It has chosen to show us this now, which means the rest is already in motion." They brought him in under the pretense of a consultation, though everyone in the room knew this was not an ordinary request. He was a scholar whose field of study had no official name known for vanishing from public life for years at a time, only to surface when a question too dangerous for open discussion demanded an answer. His arrival was quiet, a simple nod to the guards, and a measured step into the dimly lit office where the memo now rested between the president and the archivist. He did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he circled the desk, once, eyes scanning the room as if mapping its history in the silence between breaths. Only when the archivist slid the parchment toward him did he sit down, the chair creaking under his weight. He adjusted his glasses, looked at the first line, and then stopped. The pause was long enough to make the president shift uneasily in his seat. The scholar's eyes were fixed on the text, but something in them had gone distant, as though he were not reading at all, but listening to something that did not come from the room. When he finally spoke, it was in fragments, not full sentences. The ink is older than the paper. The hand that wrote this has been gone for centuries, yet it knew you would read it today. His voice trailed off, and he shook his head once sharply, as though forcing himself back into the present. The archivist asked what it said. He closed the memo and pushed it away. "You don't want me to answer," he said. Not with words. The president pressed him for clarity. But the scholar's gaze had already moved toward the window, where rain streaked the glass in erratic lines. He stood slowly, adjusting his coat, and without another glance at the desk, he walked to the door. His hand hesitated on the handle. Then he locked eyes with the man who had first examined the memo. The archivist retrieved a leather-bound folio from her satchel, one so worn the edges curled upward, as though resisting the light. She opened it to reveal an intricate star map, inked in shades of deep blue and silver. The constellations were familiar, yet rearranged into a geometry no modern chart would recognize. Threaded among them were faint lines that seemed more like veins than coordinates pulsing faintly under the lamplight. The man leaned over, tracing the lines with the tip of his finger, stopping when he reached an intersection where the ink had deepened into a perfect cross. It had not been there when the chart was last studied. The archivist confirmed, her voice low. "This is not drawn," she whispered. It emerged. The president frowned at the implication, but the man's attention had already shifted. He recognized the symmetry, the way the cross aligned perfectly with a sequence of numbers scrawled along the margin, numbers that corresponded not to dates or distances, but to passages long buried in Scripture. One, in particular, came to him unbidden. "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." The words of Yeshua ringing in his memory like a bell struck in another room. The archivist adjusted the lamp's angle, and the cross brightened its edges, shimmering as if catching a light source that did not exist in the room. The points extended beyond the paper, into the air itself, for just a breath before fading back. The man exhaled slowly, knowing symbols like this did not appear without cost, nor without consequence. Outside, the storm clouds broke in a sudden gap, revealing a narrow shaft of moonlight that found its way through the small opening in the curtains. It struck the desk precisely where the cross was marked, illuminating it in silver and shadow. The air in the room thickened the way it does in places where time feels altered. The president reached out instinctively, but the archivist caught his wrist, her voice barely audible. "Some marks are not for the unprepared." The cross dimmed again, sinking back into the ink, yet its impression remained on their vision, as though burned into the mind. From somewhere deep in the building came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps, drawing closer with each passing second. The sound moved like a draft, yet carried no chill. a thread of air winding its way through the corridors of the building. It was not loud enough to be conversation yet. It pulled at the edges of awareness like a memory trying to surface. The man was the first to notice his head tilting slightly, as if to catch words beneath the hum of distant machinery. The archivist stiffened, too, her gaze shifting toward the heavy double doors that led deeper into the west wing. The president caught their reactions and asked what they heard, but neither answered. Instead, they followed the sound out into the hall, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The air smelled faintly of old stone and candle smoke, though neither belonged to this place. They reached a corridor lined with marble columns, the kind polished to a mirror sheen. The whisper moved along its length, darting ahead, then circling back as if testing whether they would follow. The man slowed his pace, studying the way light bent across the floor. The reflection in the marble was wrong, slightly delayed like a shadow that had forgotten how to keep time. Halfway down the hall, the sound stopped, leaving a silence so complete it rang in the ears. Then, from behind one of the columns, a single word emerged, not spoken, but placed directly into the mind. It was a name, one the man had heard only once before, in a context never meant for open air. The archivist's eyes widened, confirming she had heard the same. Before either could respond, the far doors creaked open, though no one was visible beyond them. A rush of air carried the faintest scent of rain and parchment. The president stood at the other end of the corridor, watching them with an unreadable expression, as if he too had been following a thread of the same sound. The whisper returned softer now, curling back toward the darkness between the columns. It carried no urgency, yet it demanded attention, drawing them forward, one measured step at a time. The man reached for the cool marble surface, but his hand passed through the reflection as though it were water, disturbed by an unseen tide. The room was small, and without windows, lit only by a single candle that stood in the center of a round table. Its flame wavered, though there was no draft casting, long, uneven shadows across the walls. The archivist set the memo down beside an envelope, bound with crimson wax, stamped with a seal. None of them recognized. The emblem was intricate. A circle enclosing an unfamiliar script woven around a symbol that looked half like a key and half like an eye. The president reached for it, but the man stopped him. Instead, he slid the envelope toward the edge of the table where the candle's heat could soften the wax. Without touch, the seal began to sweat, tiny beads forming along its edges. A faint hiss followed, as if the wax itself resisted, surrendering its hold. Then, with no warning, the seal split cleanly down the center, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. The parchment inside was older than the memo, its fibers rough, and its scent carrying the dry sweetness of forgotten archives. In the top corner, faint marks in gold leaf caught the candlelight, forming a shape that grew clearer as the angle shifted. It was the outline of a crown, yet within it a figure stood, arms outstretched in the form of a cross. The archivist inhaled sharply, recognizing the motif from rare, illuminated manuscripts held in hidden collections. The text itself was brief, but each word felt carved rather than written. The appointed hour comes when the hidden fire meets the unmarked vessel guard, the path until the lamp is lifted. The man glanced at the cross within the crown, and though he said nothing, Yeshua's words about not hiding a lamp under a bowl came to him unbidden. Their weight pressed into the moment, the way ancient truths surface without permission. The candle flickered violently, and a droplet of wax fell onto the parchment, yet did not mar it. Instead, it vanished into the fibers, leaving no trace. The seal's broken halves lay on the table like two empty shells. The president reached for them, but the archivist shook her head. Some seals once broken cannot be remade, even by those who set them. From beyond the closed door came the faint rhythm of footsteps, stopping just outside, as if someone had been listening all along. It began as a faint shimmer along the edge of the parchment, so subtle it might have been dismissed as a trick of the candlelight. But the candle had already been extinguished minutes before leaving the room in shadow. The glow was its own source, pale and steady, like moonlight filtered through water. It spread inward, tracing the contours of the letters until each word seemed carved from light. The man leaned forward, his hand hovering just above the page. The air above it was warm, not with heat, but with the hum of something alive. The archivist watched without speaking, her eyes fixed on the way the illumination revealed details no one had noticed before. Tiny symbols etched between the lines, invisible under normal light, now emerged like constellations hidden in plain sight. The president circled the table slowly, keeping his gaze on the parchment. His shadow moved across the walls, yet not across the page itself, as if the light resisted being touched. He asked what the symbols meant, but neither of them answered immediately. The man was tracing their sequence in his mind, noting how they aligned with patterns found in ancient architectural designs, patterns that some believed were laid down to mirror the heavens themselves. Halfway through the sequence, a faint vibration passed through the table, a resonance so low it was felt rather than heard. The glow intensified for a brief moment, forming the outline of a gate or archway, its curve perfect and unbroken. The archivist whispered that she had seen this once before, in a monastery vault where the walls bore murals of thresholds leading into realms not marked on any map. The light pulsed twice, then steadied again as if waiting for something to complete it. The man glanced at the president. There is more, but it will not show itself until it is recognized. The president's brow furrowed at the ambiguity, yet he seemed unwilling to press further. As the glow began to fade, the symbols retreated back into the parchment, disappearing one by one, until only the ordinary text remained. The room felt colder, though no breeze had entered. The archivist carefully closed the page, as if sealing in what little remained visible. In the hallway beyond the door, a faint metallic click echoed like the sound of a latch releasing itself without a hand to turn it. The parchment lay flat on the table, yet the archivist's hand hovered above it, as though she sensed another layer waiting to emerge. She pressed lightly along one corner, and the fibers responded, not by tearing, but by bending into a crease already set long ago. The man joined her effort, tracing the faint lines that suggested the page had once been folded into a shape far smaller than its current form. With deliberate care, they began folding along those hidden seams, each movement revealing new intersections of ink that had never been meant to be seen in isolation. As the final fold took shape, the text rearranged itself, the scattered words and symbols aligning into a single, uninterrupted passage. Its letters were sharper than the rest of the script, as if freshly inscribed. "Blessed are those who guard the gate until the day it is opened, for they shall see the light before the dawn." The president read the line aloud, his voice carrying a weight he had not intended. The man's gaze drifted to the phrase, "See the light before the dawn," recalling the words of Yeshua about the watchman who waits for the morning, not knowing the hour, but ready when it comes. The echo was not accidental, the alignment too precise to be coincidence. The folded parchment now resembled a small square, its edges perfect, its surface marked only by a single sigil pressed faintly into the center. The archivist brushed her fingers over it, and the texture changed from paper to something smoother, colder, like polished stone. She looked at the others with an expression that carried both awe and unease. "This is not the end of the document," she said. "This is the key." The candlelight did not touch it, the shadows bending away from its surface. The man placed his palm over the sigil, and a faint pulse moved up his arm into his chest like a heartbeat not his own. For a moment, the air in the room felt thin, and every sound in the building faded away, leaving only the hush of the folded square between them. Somewhere far above, in the unseen reaches of the night, a low, distant sound began to rise, not yet clear enough to name, but growing steadily, as if approaching from beyond the edge of the world.